So I hope everybody got access to now this practice video also as a stakeholder, except Praveen and Ramesh, right?
Yes, I have access.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I hope now everybody is clear about the resource hierarchy in the Azure and the resource hierarchy in the Azure DevOps, right? Is everybody clear about those? I mean, the reason why I'm asking specifically is in the real time, when you're going to get any kind of issues in the real time, when you're going to get any kind of issues related to any kind of like related to access or related to security or related to provisioning or related to debugging or related to implementation or related to automation or related to development, any kind of either in Azure or in the Azure DevOps, you should be able to resolve it on the grounds of resource hierarchy. Okay, so let me tell you something. Hope you can see my screen now. Guys, can you see my screen? It's not loading. Huh?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. So, as a Azure admin or as a Azure DevOps admin or engineer, okay, you should be able to you should be able to implement the requirement and at the time of implementation or at the time of managing or administrating the resources in Azure or Azure DevOps. Everybody needs to know about governance of the resources. Governance of the resources. Okay, and everybody should be know security of the resources. Everybody should be know cost optimization of the resources. Everybody should be know about implementing or building reliability of the resources. I mean, these are limited actually. These are not limited. We have other scopes also. But whenever you're going to work on any kind of implementation of a resource in the Azure, or whenever you're going to work on implementation of any kind of requirements in the Azure DevOps, everybody should be know about all these four parameters at least. We have more parameters to be considered, but these are the frequent use of the four parameters basically. So whenever somebody asks you to create a virtual machine, or whenever somebody asks you to create a virtual network, or whenever somebody asks you to create a storage account or web app or database, the database can be SQL database or no SQL database. So in the case of SQL database, you should be ready to deal with the MySQL, MS SQL, PostgreSQL. In the case of NoSQL database, you should be able to ready with the MongoDB, Cassandra DB, Kafka DB, or whatever it is. So, as a administrator or as an engineer, the first priority is to know the available resources of all the requirements. I mean, I know that at this point of level, you might not need about this information, but every engineer, I mean, every administrator, either Azure DevOps engineer or Azure engineer, or Azure DevOps administrator or Azure administrator. Every engineer goal would be like becoming an architect, right? On the Azure Infra Architect or Azure Solution Architect or Azure development architect, or Azure database architect, data architect, or data modeling architect. I mean, we have a list of architects available basically. But so every engineer responsibility or every engineer expectation would be like, I want to become an architect. So in order to be or in order to become a better architect in the tomorrow, you should be able to ready or you should be able to know about the different security, different parameters while you are going to deal with the resource. So basically, the governance matters, the security matters, the cost optimization matters, and the reliability of the resources also matters. And it is not limited to these four only. We have more components. I'll be discussing when time comes. Okay. So now, why we need to know about this, or why we need to focus on this when you're going to do any kind of implementation in the Azure or in the Azure DevOps. On the customer point of view, everybody should be able to create a resource, or everybody should be able to implement a solution with the high availability, right? At the same time, the resource should be monitored. At the same time, the resource security should not be compromised at any cost. At the same time, the resource should be implemented, monitored, administrated, managed under the less cost, and the service or the resource should be available all the time to provide the services accordingly. Right? Suppose now we are buying, if you are going to buy a car, or if you are going to buy a bicycle, or if you are going to buy a bike, obviously for every 3 months or for every 6 months, you are going to get it serviced, right? To make sure the vehicle is working in a good condition all the time, right? In the same way, everybody, I mean, every resource in the Azure or every resource in the Azure administrator, I mean, Azure DevOps should be also getting serviced on every month actually. In the case of IaaS resources, you might get a notification like that, or you might get a you'll be you're the responsible person to manage the get the resource serviced. But in the case of PaaS services or in the case of SaaS services, it is the responsibility of the Microsoft to get them serviced. So in the interview, they'll be asking a question: what are the deployment models? What are the deployment models? Those are available in Azure. The answer should be IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, IDaaS, SaaS, CS. Anybody have any idea about this? And if you ask me, and etc. actually, not limited to these also. And if anybody is talking about IaaS, if anybody is talking about cloud services, then they will be definitely talking about IaaS, PaaS, SaaS only. But these are also called as services based on the cloud only. All of it clear? And all these are can be called as deployment models or cloud services. If somebody asks you what are the cloud services, what are the cloud services or deployment models that those are available in Azure, or those are, I mean, those you are aware of, then you can say for every cloud these are common, but for an Azure we have all these also. Okay, what actually stands for IaaS? Infrastructure.
Platform.
PaaS. platform as a service, SaaS, software as a service, right? Then what? IDaaS. Then what? DaaS. Then that what? CS. Simple answer. So basically, in the case of IaaS, you will be dealing with compute resources, and network resources. In the case of platform as a service, you will be dealing with the platform resources. So like web apps, mobile apps, function apps, logic apps, power apps, and database. Sorry, database won't come on this. These are example only, not limited. In the case of SaaS software, you'll be discussing about O365 majorly. In the case of IDaaS, but before that, what actually stands for IDaaS? IDaaS can be treated as, IDaaS will be called as identity and access management as a service, or identity and directory management as a service. So basically, if you ask me what is the example for this one, the simple answer is Azure Active Directory is comes under the IDaaS services. All of you clear? What actually IDaaS? Azure Active Directory in the Azure is called as the IDaaS service. So if you ask me about IDaaS services, in more specifically, I would say like RBAC and ABAC are the components of AID, right? Whereas RBAC will be used to implement the access control, or RBAC will be used to implement the access management at the management group level, or subscription level, or resource group level, or resource level. Whereas ABAC, attribute based access control, will be used for the directory roles. So in the Azure, if you ask about the security roles, I'll basically classify them into Azure roles and directory roles. So whereas to manage the access management of the Azure roles, to manage the access management of the Azure resources, I will make use of access management called RBAC. To manage the access management of the directory resources, in bracket Azure Active Directory resources, I will make use of the access management called ABAC, right? ABAC means attribute based access control. RBAC means role based access control. So if you ask me about what are the different types of AID services or the flavors that we have, or the editions we have available, basically we have three kind of services available: Azure Active Directory free, and basically these are licenses in simple term. Azure Active Directory P1, Azure Active Directory P2. These are the three kind of licenses available, and based on the license category that you are going to select, you are going to get the services offered by the Azure itself. Okay, so what actually stands for DaaS? Simple answer. DaaS will be like data as a service. Data as a service. So basically, all the resources, all the resources comes under the category, comes under this category of data related resources. So in simple classification, we'll say them like databases, data warehouses, data warehouses. So if you ask me about the databases, what exactly the classification? Sorry, what exactly the classification? Databases will be classified into SQL databases and NoSQL databases. So if you ask me about the SQL databases, these can be called as relational databases in other terminology. Relational databases, and these can be called as non-relational databases. If you ask me about the example of the SQL databases, I would say like MS SQL and MySQL and Post GRE SQL. I mean, we are going to discuss about all these resources in the coming classes for at least one time. So that's why I wanted to give a classification on this one. Okay. So if you ask me about the MS SQL, it can be called as SQL Database Services from Microsoft. So if you ask me about my MySQL, SQL Databases Services from MySQL company. MySQL is different, MS SQL is different, PostgreSQL SQL is different. In the same way, Oracle SQL is also different. Whereas SQL is the kind of service and these are the different kind of providers. If you ask me what exactly the similar kind of implementation, you will be using tire. When you're going to discuss about the tire, you're going to choose like Apollo tire or Seat tire or any other tire, right? In the same way, SQL is a kind of service and these are all the different kind of vendors. Okay. So in case of the NoSQL database, what actually stands for NoSQL? NoSQL means not SQL, not not NoSQL. NoSQL means not only SQL. All of it clear? That means this NoSQL databases will support the data storage part of the relational data and non-relational data also. That means NoSQL will be able to save the data of the SQL kind of data and NoSQL kind of data also. So if you ask me about the classification in the Azure, we have a concept called Cosmos DB. Outside, you can discuss about the MongoDB, you can discuss about the Cassandra DB, you can discuss about the Kafka DB. All of it clear? I mean, I'm not listing out all the details. For basic reference only I'm giving here. So next one is CIAS. CIAS means security as a service. Security as a service in the Azure. Basically, this will be comes on. Basically, this is comes under Azure Defender, Azure Firewall, Azure Sentinel. All these comes under this services category. If you ask me about anything else, so we have only. I mean, we are going to discuss about only these few, or we should be aware of only these few. No, in the Azure, we have almost like 600 kind of services, 600 kind of resources. So you should be able to know about each and every resource. That doesn't mean like that from the day one you should be able to, you should be able to deal with the every resource. It's not required. When you are entering into the industry, you should have an idea about the all the resources, and you should have at least a proficiency in at least couple of resources, like IaaS resources and PaaS resources. At least one resource, IaaS resources category. All of you clear about this till now? So there is a concept called everybody will be feeling like that. I will be working as administrator. Here you need to get a clarity for what administrator you are going to work as. Azure administrator for IaaS services, or Azure administrator for PaaS services, Azure administrator for identity services. So basically, this guy will deal with the all the IaaS services, and this guy will deal with the PaaS services, and this guy will deal with the AAD services. Basically, IDaaS services. These are example only, not limited. So the other one is we have a role called Azure developer. So basically, this guy will deal with the development of the development using PaaS services, and Azure administrator for data services. And we call in the real time, like Azure administrator for data services, and in the real time, this guy will be dealing with the all the DaaS services, and we call them like Azure data administrator, or as we call them Azure data engineer. So apart from this, what kind of roles we have in the Azure is Azure automation engineer, whereas he will be dealing with the run books mostly, and automation accounts in the Azure, and PowerShell scripting, and shells Azure CLI scripting, and Azure API management. So these are basically few list, a few of the uh, roles available in the scope of the Azure administrator, but not limited. We have more actually to deal with the Azure network engineer, to deal with the Azure security engineer, to deal with the Azure cyber threat, cyber security engineer, and to deal with the Azure AI administrator, to deal with the Azure machine learning related components. We have more services available in the Azure. But one thing is that out of all these available basic classification, you should be able to nominate yourself, either it comes under the Azure IaaS category, or either it comes under the Azure PaaS category, or identity category, or developer category, or administrator category, data administrator category, or automation engineer category. All these services, all these roles based jobs are available in the market. All of it clear? Then here you comes Azure DevOps scope. So as I'm saying from the day one, like in the based on the Azure DevOps, we have basically three kind of roles in the market. So Azure DevOps administrator, Azure DevOps engineer, and Azure DevOps architect. Whereas suppose there is a team of 10 members. who is supporting for the implementation of the DevOps culture using Azure DevOps. Basically, number of Azure DevOps administrators, mostly one. Number of Azure DevOps architect will be one. Number of Azure DevOps engineers will be 8. Out of this 8, how exactly the team may be configured, not completely and accurately. Okay, the team may be configured. Three engineers will be taking care of three or mostly, let me say, like 5 engineers will be taking care of build and release activities. Okay, three engineers will be taking the responsibility of the automation scope of the activities. So what exactly this 5 engineers will be like? These role will be like build engineer and release engineer. So what exactly these guys scope in the real time? Build engineer like will be taking the responsibilities of the implementation of the solutions using the DevOps concepts. Release engineer will take the responsibilities of like will be taking the responsibilities of deployment of the solutions using the DevOps concepts, and those solutions are developed using the build part basically. And sometimes if the team count is less, build sorry build and release engineer responsibilities will be handled by same persons. That means a person should be able to deal with the build engineer responsibilities, and a person should be able to deal with the release engineer responsibilities also. So before the DevOps terminology comes into the picture, every team also has, you might get it out like that. Okay, now we are hearing about the DevOps, but what about the like DevOps is there for almost like just before 10 years, I think. I mean, just up to 10 years or 12 years. After the before that DevOps terminology evolution, don't we have these engineers for these operations? And from that time, before the DevOps also, these roles are available in the market. Build and release engineer roles. Those roles are called as, I mean, the responsibilities which are being handled by a DevOps engineer in the now were handled. These responsibilities were handled by the engineers called build engineer and release engineer. Those were the title of the engineers who was working as a DevOps engineer right now. DevOps is the terminology that is newly introduced just before 10 years. But before the DevOps terminology introduced, we have those kind of jobs, we have those kind of responsibilities, we have those kind of activities or roles, and those roles are called as build engineer and release engineer. Okay, name is changed. That's it. The responsibilities are still same, but what actually differs the build and release engineer and DevOps engineer? So, whereas the build and release engineer scope is limited, whereas the DevOps engineer scope is extended. So DevOps engineer is the additional activity for build and release in the scope of the activities. You might feel like that why we are discussing about these things. Simple answer. In order to build a best, in order to build a best or the better product, or in order to build a better DevOps strategy or the best DevOps strategy, or in order to build a DevOps culture or the best DevOps culture in the project that you're going to work on, you should be able to know about all these basics. And exclusively about this concept, what I'm discussing right now is this is going to help you in the time of interview, because in the time of interview I will be as an interviewer I'm going to ask you like, can you explain me about your project? Can you explain me about your project? Simple question. Then you should be able to know, and you should have a clarity about how many number of team members are working in my DevOps team, and how many projects that I'm going to support, and how many activities that I'm going to be taking care of, and how many deployments I'm going to do, and how many responsibilities that I'm responsible for. All these parameters that you need to reveal in the interview when you're going to talk about the project. And the first thing what they will ask you is, when you're saying like, I am a experienced Azure DevOps engineer, the first thing they will ask you about is the project information. Tell me about your project. So the project information. Next, how exactly the deployment will be managed. Deployment strategy. Next, how exactly you're getting focused like about the project. So let me be more clear on this. If they are asking about the project information, then you need to discuss about the team management and the team structure. First point. Second point, you need to tell about your project objective. I'm telling again, you should not never ever reveal the name of the client that you're working as per the NDA document, as I told you in the earlier classes. As per the NDA agreement that you are going to sign when you joining the company, you should not disclose at any cost. You should not disclose the client name or the project details completely with the name of the client or with the name of the team. All of it clear? It's a serious kind of violation that you're doing. Non-disclosure agreement. As per the non-disclosure agreement, you should not mention your client name. You should not reveal your client name in the resume or in the oral discussion or in the any kind of discussion, especially when the sessions are getting recorded. As per the NDA agreement that you have signed when you're going to join a company, you should not reveal the information of the client. You should not reveal the information of the technologies, or you should not reveal the you should not reveal the information about the how exactly the technologies are going to be used in your project, or how exactly the architectures are implemented in a direct way actually. All of it clear? So when you're going to talk about the project information, you should be able to let the interviewer know about the team management on the team structure, and then next one is project objective, and the next one is project category, and the next one is project solutions offering, and the next one is project life cycle. So the project objective means, my project is like, I mean our project is like, we have implemented the DevOps culture in this project to provide the better output or to provide the better solutions to the customers of the retailing market, of the pharma market, of the banking solutions, of the insurance domain. In that way you need to say, you should not reveal about your client name at any cost. Okay. Then project category. So what exactly comes under the project category? Basically, every DevOps project category will be falls under couple of categories like DevOps project for development, then DevOps project for administration, next DevOps project for automation, next DevOps process for database administration or database activities, or simply data oriented or data driven projects in the real time we call like. And the other in the market right now we have like DevOps for AI projects, AI or ML or data science projects. Basically, in this case, we call these DevOps operations like ML operations. So these are the different kinds of category of projects we have available in the market. So at the time of disclosing about your project in the interview, you need to say like that I have worked on the DevOps project where our end objective is to provide the implement the DevOps culture for the development team, implement the DevOps culture for the administration team, implement the DevOps culture for the automation team, implement the DevOps culture for the data driven projects, implemented the DevOps culture for AI or machine learning or data science projects. So these are the different kinds of DevOps projects that we have available in the market. Okay. At the end of the day, why we are saying like, project solutions offering, like if you ask me about this project solutions offering, the first question that when you are going to be part of the interview, they will ask you is your DevOps project or is the project that you are working on is working on for which environment? You're targeting for which environment? You're targeting for only on-premise environment, or you're targeting for only cloud native environment, or you're targeting for only hybrid environment? Simple answer. If you are building your pipelines, if you are building your pipe, if you are implementing your DevOps culture only for the resources available in your company premises, then it is said to be you have implemented the DevOps culture for your on-premise environment. And all the solutions that you're, all the pipelines or all the activities or all the DevOps culture activities that you're going to be implement for the resources those are provisioned, or the for the resources those are getting managed, or the for the resources those are getting administrated in the only cloud. You don't have any on-premise environment. You have only in cloud. That is called a cloud native environment. Suppose you have implement, you're part of a team, you're part of a DevOps team where you have implemented the DevOps culture for both the solutions, like both the environments, like on-premise environment and cloud environment, cloud native. Then it is said to be hybrid environment. This is this point also that you need to mention at the time of the interview. I have worked on, I was part of a DevOps team where we have implemented the DevOps culture for the on-premise environment or for the cloud native environment or for the hybrid environment. So based on this, you are going to get interviewed. All of it clear? Then project life cycle, like how exactly the project is going to be executed in the real time. And then deployment strategy. So what exactly the deployment strategy means is, what exactly the deployment strategy means, they will be asking you like how much frequency, how much frequency that your features I mean your project features are going to be deployed are going to be deployed in live environment. In the shortcut we say like to the production. This is called deployment strategy. All of it clear? And the third point that you will be mostly focusing should be your focus should be mostly on the strategy implementation. Strategy implementation. So basically, what exactly the strategy defines for is a strategy implementation is the ultimate design of the your DevOps culture implemented for a project. So basically, what kind of strategies that you are going to be discussed, or basically what kind of strategies that you should be aware of when you're going to be part of a DevOps team. Guys, everybody clear till now, right? And questions? Acknowledgement, please.
What is the hybrid environment, sir?
The combination of the on-premise servers and the cloud servers, or the
Okay.
combination of the on-premise resources and the cloud resources.
Okay.
All of you clear till now, right? I hope so.
Yes, sir.
So, as a DevOps engineer, how exactly your thought should be? As a DevOps engineer, how exactly your point of focus should be? In the real time, when you're going to work on, or as a Azure DevOps engineer, or Azure DevOps administrator, or Azure DevOps architect, first of all, the responsibility of you as you're going to be joining a new team, how exactly how exactly team management is implemented, or team is configured. Next, how exactly version control system is configured, how exactly build management is configured, how exactly release management is configured, how exactly code coverage or code scanning or code quality or code security or application security or product security is configured. Next, how exactly artifact management is configured, how exactly test plan or project testing management is configured, testing management or quality of the testing is configured, and how exactly the monitoring of the product is configured, how exactly the operations life cycle of the product is configured. So when you talk about the version control, this will be talking about the repo management, branch management, and pull request management, and merge activities. And we'll be discussing about the version control in the coming classes, but I'm just giving about this one. And the end of the day, you should be able to focus on the as a DevOps engineer. You should have always a question in your mind like how I am going, how I am going to be benefited for this project, and at the same time how this project experience is going to benefit for my professional and personal experience. Discussion about DevOps and Azure Engineer mindset. I mean, as I told you in the initial classes, whenever you're going to be part of a team, or whenever you're going to be part of a project, or whenever you're going to be part of a training team or training batch, the end of the day that you need to carry from the project or from the team or from the training classes is you need to carry with you, or you need to take away the thought process, not only the technology, not only experience or learning experience or learning on the technology or tool. You need to know about thought process. You need to develop your thought process. So if you develop your thought process and if you acquire the thought process mechanism, automatically you're going to learn about the technology for sure. And automatically going to learn the tools without any doubt. So always focus on thought process. How do I and how should I improve my thought process? And how should I develop my thought process? From the yesterday stage to today's stage. From the previous moment to this moment. You have to build your focus to develop your thought process. You have to build your skill set to in order to develop your thought process. You need to learn the technology, you need to learn the tools in order to give the better solutions or the best solutions. Out of me, out of me, out of me always. In this way only you are going to survive in the IT industry. So any minute information in the Azure DevOps project, or any minute information in the Azure DevOps, or any minute information in the Azure, either Azure administration or Azure development or Azure automation, whatever it is, you should not miss at any point of time. Invest one day in learning today so that it will give you 10 days of food in the future. Food for 10 days. If you invest one day in learning today, you're going to get food for 10 days at least in the future. At least 10 days. That's the power of the learning. Okay. So, I am completed with this mindset concept. Now I'm going back to our actual objective. So, when you're talking about the Azure DevOps, when you're talking about the Azure DevOps, what exactly you need to learn? Basically, in the Azure DevOps, you need to learn about three major concepts, three major sections, or three major parts. The first one is organization settings. Second one is project settings. The third one is profiles. Basically, this is also called, instead of settings, let me call this organization profile. This is also called as projects profile, and this is called as user profiles. So this organization profile always will discuss about the organization settings. The project profile will always deal about the project settings. The user profile will always deal about the user settings. So if you know about these different sections or these different profiles are these different settings about Azure DevOps portal dev.azure.com/radio. Then you are set to be a perfect Azure DevOps administrator, and you are set to be a perfect Azure DevOps engineer, and you are set to be a perfect Azure DevOps architect. You should have understanding. You should have implementation knowledge on these three profiles basically. And if you know about all the components and all the sections or all the intersections of all these three files, then you're a good experienced Azure DevOps candidate. Trust me, to come to this stage, you need to have at least 2 to 3 years of experience on the Azure DevOps in the real time. But I'm going to share all the knowledge that I have captured or I have experienced till date in the field of Azure DevOps by end of this batch, mostly. But one thing is that you should be able to grab them, and you should be able to implement them by practice. And it's a challenge for you. And if you can check with anybody in the market who is working on the Azure DevOps in the industry right now, they won't be available or they won't be aware of the hierarchy of the resource in the DevOps. Out of 100 members, only 30 members or 20 members are aware of the resource hierarchy in the DevOps or the resource hierarchy in the Azure. That is for sure. All of it clear? So I hope now everybody is aware like what exactly I can do maintain the organization profile, where exactly I can do maintain the uh, project profile, where exactly you can do maintain the user profile, right? So basically organization profile or organization settings can be maintained in the organization in this place. And if you want to deal or if you want to manage the project profile, this space. And if you want to provide the or if you want to manage the user profile, is this space? No, this is the place. This page is different and this page is different. All of it clear? This is your Azure account or this is your Office login account, and this is your Azure DevOps user account properties. So everybody should be aware of organization settings. Everybody should be aware of project settings. Everybody should be aware of user settings. All of it clear? So as I told you in the earlier, you should be able to know about all these resources basically, like dev.azure.com, then aex.dev.azure.com, then status.azure.com, status.dev.azure.com. These three URLs you should be remembering at any point of time in your life when you're going to deal with Azure DevOps. Yep. Any questions, please? I think somebody is asking a question. Guys,
Manikanta, can you please repeat, what are the organization profiles, user profiles? So,
yeah, I mean, these are the three profiles that you need to be remember always, and you need to you should be able to implement any kind of requirement, or you should be able to modify any kind of requirement basically.
Okay,
And
let me put my understandings. So
yeah,
organization profile is basically your Azure account, right?
no, Azure DevOps account.
Oh, whatever, yeah, Azure DevOps account, and project profile would be like ADOs.
Let me show you. So this Azure DevOps organization settings would be your organization profile.
Azure DevOps settings.
Azure DevOps organization settings basically. And if
Mm-hmm.
you go to project, you're going to get an option called project settings, right? This is called your project profile,
Okay.
and this is called your user profile. So these three profiles, it doesn't matter whether you are dealing or discussing about the Azure DevOps architecture, or you're dealing about discussing about Azure DevOps administration, or Azure DevOps engineer. Every three, any of the role of the person should be aware of these three profiles. Basically, it's a kind of layer actually:
Mm-hmm.
project layer, organization layer, user layer.
Yeah.
So that is the reason to explain about these three profiles of these three settings. Yesterday we have discussed about the Azure DevOps resource hierarchy.
Yes, yes.
All of it clear? So in the interview, they may ask you a question like, can you explain how exactly users and projects are interlinked? Or they will be asking you like, can you explain how exactly users and projects and organizations are linked, interlinked basically.
Okay, yeah.
So to answer those questions, you should be able to understand, you should be having the idea of explaining about the resource hierarchy in the Azure DevOps.
So basically,
Unless, yeah,
what are the settings covered under user settings and organization settings and profile other setting?
organization settings will be mostly focusing on the how exactly the organization should be managed. Project will be discussed about, and project setting will be discussed about how exactly your project should be managed, or how exactly your project should be accessed. We are going
When you say,
to discuss in detail in the coming classes
okay,
about this.
okay, that's
At
fine.
this stage of introduction, this is enough, I feel like. But explaining we are going to have each and every component explanation in the coming classes daily.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah, it makes sense.
So the user profile is doesn't mean this one. User profile is this one, the user symbol. Okay, this is your Microsoft account. The account that you got created in the Azure portal actually,
Yes.
or the account that you got created in the Office 365 actually. This is not the Azure DevOps user profile. Okay, this is the Azure DevOps user profile.
Mm-hmm.
This is your Azure DevOps account profile. This is your Azure DevOps user profile. Both are different.
Okay.
The account in Azure DevOps, the account in Azure, the account in Office 365 are same. There's no difference. But the user profile, the Azure DevOps is completely different from Azure DevOps account. So
Okay.
that's why I
Okay.
mentioned like user settings. All of it clear, guys? I need acknowledgement to move on, please.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mani.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, what exactly now we are going to do, or what exactly now we are going to discuss? Okay. So, as I told you in the initial, as I told you in the previous session, like now only about this mindset concept. You should be able to discuss about this one. basically. I mean, as part of your technical round one with any company, if you can answer the questions related to, or if you are able to explain the questions related to, if you can answer the questions related to, or if you can explain the questions related to this scope about your project architecture, about your deployment strategy, about your project lifecycle, about your project environment, everything. Trust me, you're going to get clear the first round of interview for sure. All of it clear?
When when you say deployment strategy, there are a couple of strategies like blue, green, canary. So are we going to discuss
Those are
those?
called actually deployment patterns.
Okay. But
Blue green deployment pattern, canary deployment pattern, and we have more actually. But in the industry,
yeah.
we are getting used only blue green and canary mostly.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, basically,
Good.
deployment patterns is main focus is deployment strategy only.
Yes. Yes.
But the deployment strategy, I mean, in the blue green deployment pattern or the candidate deployment pattern, majorly you're going to focus on, you're going to prepare the your mindset for production environment basically, not for
Yes. Yes.
the other environment.
Yes.
But
I
the
think for
deployment
dev,
strategy, yeah,
yeah.
the for the deployment
I think
strategy will be focusing on all the kinds of environments, not only for the product.
okay. 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 Okay.
Sir, in Azure DevOps, what is the Power Platform, sir?
Power platform. I didn't get you.
Yeah.
Can you come again?
In some interviews, they are requiring about the Power Platform. They are asking about the Power Platform.
Power platform. Basically, in the Azure, there are a couple of services called Power Apps and Power Platform. Maybe they are talking about this one. But to be honest, it doesn't at all related to Azure DevOps. Azure related. Please cross check and let me know if that is related to Azure DevOps. I'll definitely get back to you. I mean, I'm
Okay,
not
okay.
aware of the Power Platform at this point of time in the Azure DevOps. Maybe it is there, but I'm sure that it's not part of Azure DevOps. It's part of Azure. Correct me if I'm wrong,
Okay,
please. Okay.
okay.
Manikanda, regarding the deployments, so when you say it's blue-green deployment, uh, in the core Azure also you're talking about that, or only in the platform as a service you're talking about it?
I'm talking about basically the deployment patterns will be implemented deployment cycle, but the objective is to deal with Azure only. Azure or on-premise or any cloud.
Okay.
To be honest, if in case in the real-time project, if you're part of in the real-time project, Azure DevOps doesn't at all meaning or DevOps doesn't at all created for only Azure purpose. In the market there is a misconception, or in the market there is a myth that Azure DevOps and Azure are interlinked. No, not at all. Azure DevOps is completely a different stream. But to manage the Azure DevOps in a better way, we are using Azure. We are taking the help of the Azure Active Directory. That's it. All of you clear? To manage the Azure DevOps in a better way for the on the grounds of identity and security and access management, we are integrating your Azure DevOps with Azure Active Directory. And if you are going to integrate your Azure DevOps with Azure Active Directory, it doesn't mean that your environment is on Azure only. It doesn't mean that, I mean, one more thing. If you are using Azure DevOps, that doesn't mean like that you are going to work on the Azure only, Azure cloud only. Azure DevOps can be used to implement the DevOps culture, either for the on-premises environment, or for the Azure cloud, or for the GCP cloud, or for the AWS cloud. Suppose in your organization they are using for Azure DevOps, it doesn't mean for Azure only. Azure DevOps can be used to implement the DevOps culture in GCP cloud, in AWS cloud, in Azure cloud, in your on-premises environment also. It doesn't at all. I mean, there is a myth in the market like Azure DevOps is for purely for Azure only. No, it's completely false statement. Using the Azure DevOps is a kind of a software like Visual Studio or Eclipse IDE or NetBeans IDE or Anaconda. And for Python, you're going to use Anaconda. So okay, Azure DevOps is a completely different product. It isn't at all related to Azure for sure. But with the help of the Azure Active Directory, you're going to make use of Azure DevOps in a better way. That's it. All of you clear now? If anybody is asking you like Azure DevOps and Azure are interlinked, say them. No, it's not at all. It's completely false statement. Azure DevOps is a differently and definitely a different product from Azure. I mean, a different product from Microsoft. And this product will be used. This product will be used to implement the DevOps culture for Azure cloud, to implement the DevOps culture for on-premise environment, to implement the DevOps culture for AWS cloud and for GCP cloud also. I mean, at this point of time, it's not completely supporting for GCP, but the future plan is there that it's going to support all the clouds, not only GCP, about IBM cloud or VMware cloud or SAP cloud or Oracle cloud, anything. It's going to be supported as per the roadmap that is revealed by revealed by the Microsoft in one of the sessions in the earlier. Azure DevOps end of the day objective is to implement the DevOps culture for any environment or any cloud. It can be hybrid environment, it can be a cloud native environment, it can be on-premise environment. It can be AWS cloud, it can be GCP cloud, it can be Azure cloud, it can be SAP cloud, it can be Oracle cloud, it can be VMware cloud or IBM cloud, whatever it is. All of you clear? Azure DevOps scope is not at all only limited to Azure, but also Azure. Hope you are clear. I mean, the reason why I'm stressing on these points is when you're going to apply for the interview. In the interview, there will be, I mean, at the time of interview scheduling, you will be contacted by the HR, not by the technical team. So HR may not have the technical understanding about the scope of the Azure DevOps. So correct them or be clear from your side, like what you are expecting from this HR or what you are expecting from this company or what you are expecting from this job description. You need to have clarity on those first. So that's why I'm taking this class today. Hope everybody is clear about this discussion.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so from Monday onwards we are going to discuss about the organization profile, project profile, user profile, and these are majorly, and other one is Azure DevOps services. I mean, Azure DevOps core services and Azure DevOps services. Okay, so if you ask me about what exactly comes under the Azure DevOps core services and Azure DevOps services, what I would say is clear. This is called core and other services. All of it clear? So that's why in the status.azure.com, when you have, when you checked yesterday in the status.dev.azure.com, you have these services available basically. All of it clear?
Mm.
So the core and other
Yes, sir.
services basically focusing on organization profile, product profile, user profile, and data management in the backend. ADO data management. ADO data management in the backend. Obviously, suppose yesterday, Kamala has saved the data in the Rockstar ADO, right? I mean, not only Kamala, like anybody, everybody have everybody have pushed the solution in the repository, right? This repository, the code has been pushed to here in the as per the initial classes that we have taken. We have pushed the solution from your Visual Studio to this ADO, right? So this data need to be stored somewhere, right? Definitely some storage account or some storage server or some file server or some NFS server, whatever it is. So that will be comes under this core services. So that's why I mentioned like ADO data management in the backend. All of it clear? What exactly comes under the core and other services, and what exactly comes under the ADO services? And if anybody asks a question, what do you call Azure DevOps? What kind of a product it is called? And simply say them like it is a SaaS product, software as a service from Microsoft. Azure DevOps is a SaaS product. Azure DevOps is a software as a service product. It's not a platform as a service. All of it clear? Okay. Now we are going to discuss about something related to Azure DevOps evolution history. Anybody have any idea? Okay, let me clear. Basically, Azure DevOps is offered in two flavors or two editions. Two editions. One is offline edition and one is online edition. So the offline edition is called as Azure DevOps Server. The online edition is called as Azure DevOps Services. All of you clear about this one? The flavors are the editions. Okay. So Azure DevOps. Earlier it was called as, this got evaluated from Visual Studio Team Services. In shortcut, VSTS. Let me make it like this. Visual Studio Team Services. In shortcut, this is VSTS. And this one was evaluated from Team Foundation Services. This is called TFS simply. Okay, so that means the persons who have worked on TFS or the person who have worked on VSTS are also Azure DevOps engineers. But the features those were available on the TFS, the features those are available on the VSTS, the features those are available on the Azure DevOps is completely a drastic change. All of it clear? I mean, in the interview, they will be focused if they are clear enough about the history of the Azure DevOps. I mean, this is not the complete history basically, but it's just an update. I'll be giving you the detailed class about the history in one of the sessions. So if somebody is going to ask you how many kind of editions that you have available for Azure DevOps, or how many kind of flavors you have, you need to say them like we have Azure DevOps available in two flavors or two editions: Azure DevOps Server, Azure DevOps Services. Azure DevOps Server is like you'll be installing SQL Server, right? In I mean, you'll be installing SQL Server, or you'll be installing this what do you say, DHCP server or DNS server or WDS server or IAS server or RIS server or WSU server. So all those of different products. This is also a server. In simply, if you are going to install the Visual Studio and the enterprise server, then it is said to be like VSTS server. So in the same way, it is like Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps server is also a software only. You need to install it on the Windows. Like how exactly you're going to install the SQL server on a Windows OS. Azure DevOps also a similar kind of software product only. But this software is made it available for the end users or the customers using based on a website. So that means software is being provided on the internet as a service. So that's why the Azure DevOps services became software as a service. Are we clear? Are there any questions on this? Azure DevOps terminology is new to market, but the product is not new to market. The product was available in the previous time, like VSTS and TFS.
Manikanta, I think yesterday I've missed it. Regarding the status.dev.azure.com, what did it exactly give? Because I could see it is having a different country's status of Azure DevOps. So how
Basically,
it is
the
related
Azure
to our
DevOps,
project actually?
yeah, let me tell you. Basically, at the time of your Azure DevOps organization creation, if you click on the new organization, when you're clicking here, can you see this one, all of you? The data center where exactly your Azure DevOps repositories are going to be saved, or your pipelines are going to be saved, or your artifacts are going to be saved, or your Azure boards are going to be saved, or your Azure test plans are going to be saved. So it's a data center. These are the different data centers. Those are being supported or those are being available to make the data stored in the specific region basically by Azure DevOps. So suppose in the South India you are hosting and in the Azure DevOps status you are not good. I mean the service when you're trying to explain when you're going to execute a pipeline, the pipeline may not be executed properly. Or when you're trying to access the repos of the Azure DevOps organization where exactly this data is getting saved in the South India. That means you are having a challenge in India core services or India pipeline services. or India repo services. So basically, at the time of the Azure DevOps account creation, Azure DevOps organization creation, you are choosing this one, right? This data center. So the health of the data center will be displayed here.
Okay, okay.
All of you clear about this one? How exactly this status.dev.azure.com is related to your Azure DevOps organization? So when you are talking about this one, in the interview they will ask you a question like, can I change that the location of the a region? Where exactly? I mean, initially I have created this Avengers ADO in the South India region at the time of creation, but I wanted to make it available in the United States. I wanted to make it available in the Canada. I wanted to move it to Brazil or Europe or UK or AP, in SFS or Australia. Then you need to reach to Microsoft team actually. That can be made, but you need to reach out to Microsoft team. And in the interview, they may ask you a question. Suppose you are the Azure, you are going to work as Azure DevOps administration. In the interview, they are going to ask you a question like, mm, at the time of Azure DevOps organization creation, at the time of Azure DevOps organization creation, how I am going to be guided, or how I need to be sure, or how you are going to tell me which region that I need to pick. Simple answer is, if you are going to develop a project, or if you are going to create a Azure DevOps organization for the user base of the US, choose US. For the user base of the Canada, choose Canada. Or your project team is offering. Your development team is hosted in the Australia. Go for Australia. Your development team is Australia, based out of the Europe. Go for Europe. Basically, this the availability. I mean, one thing. Whenever you are going to create a project here, the Azure DevOps is not for your end users. End of the day, Azure DevOps is for your development team, or for your administration team, or your automation team, not for the end users. That means in the entire world, Nestle is being used. Nestle products like Maggie or Nescafe or Espresso, whatever it is, right? But the Nestle's major location is, Nestle's native location or Nestle's hosted location is Europe, Switzerland, right? So it depends on the kind of region market where the team is working actually. Basically, the region, it's an interview question actually. I was also asking in one of the interviews. When I'm going to create a ADO for the first time or for one of the requirement, how exactly I am going to be chosen this kind of data center or the host your project? Simple answer, where exactly your team is going to be operated, where exactly the pipelines are going to be used, where exactly the repository will be used, from which location, either from UK or Europe or Asia or Pacific or Australia or India or UK or Europe, or US or anywhere. Thanks for asking me this question. Okay. In the interview, they will be asking you a question about this, if they are clear about this one. How do I choose which data center to put the data? Simple answer is, where exactly your team is operating. That's it. If your team is operating based out of India, you need to choose South India. If your DevOps team is going to operate your going to operate the operations from US, you need to choose US.
Manikanta, I have another question. See, in generally in the core Azure, we'll be having availability zones, right? In a similar way for DevOps
Yep.
also, when we are deploying in specific data center, let's say in South India, So the same will be reflected in different data center as well. Let's say in different availability zone, or it is only
Simple
for the
answer.
core Azure.
The data, the data residency policy, data high availability policy, whatever that is getting applied for the Azure data, Azure resources, the same is also getting applied for Azure DevOps, because Azure DevOps is a software product that is hosted on the Azure platform itself. Okay.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
The data retention policies, the data availability policies, data security policies, data what do you say, like classification policies, all the policies and all the SLAs are going to apply. Whatever the policies those are getting applied for Azure services only. Because simple answer
Okay.
is Azure DevOps is a software product that is built and that is getting stored on the Azure data centers.
Yeah.
Everybody clear? Okay. The next thing, basically, when you want to become a Azure DevOps engineer, what exactly you have to, read about the documentation. First thing, always keep updated yourself about Azure DevOps. If you want to get updated yourself, go with this documentation, Azure DevOps documentation. Okay. For any change that's going to come in the Azure market, in the Azure DevOps, you can see here. And if you go to the resources section, you can see the different parts here. So if somebody asks you what is the license cost for a basic user, or what is the license cost for basic plus test plan user, or what is the license cost for Visual Studio, you can see here. For basic license, you need to pay $6 per month, $6 per user per month. For basic plus test plan license, you need to pay $52 per user per month. Okay. And if somebody asks you, can you tell me, I mean, in the interview, they will be asking you to check your update or not. Can you tell me what is the latest feature that is in preview? Then go to the feature timeline and see. These are the latest features, those are added to your Azure DevOps. What are the released features? That means are already available to general availability. That means you can use. I mean, we'll be discussing about these in the coming classes, but I'm just giving the heads up. That's it. What are the recent features available on the Azure DevOps? If you want to find out, you can see here. Recently released features. And the question may come in your mind, why do I need to update, or why do I need to go this? Simple answer is, I mean, at the time that when I started using the Azure DevOps in the 2018 actually. Okay. So at that point of time, we were using PowerShell Task 1. But at the time of when I was part of a team in the 2019 December, the default task for PowerShell is PowerShell version 2. So we were checking like that. Till 2019 we didn't use the PowerShell task again, as we don't have, we were not getting any requirement at this point of time. So then we got shocked. Why exactly this is changed? Then we realized, okay, Azure DevOps has made it simple for the PowerShell task to provide the options. So obviously, your Azure DevOps services portal, your Azure DevOps portal, or the view in the your Azure portal is going to change on every week or every day and every month. You have to be updated yourself. If you want to be updated on yourself, then you need to read about the feature timeline. For every product it will be there. For Azure DevOps also it's there. So as I told you, the available editions of or flavors of the Azure DevOps, this is true. You can install Azure DevOps software by downloading the Azure DevOps server software setup download, and you need to install it on the Windows server basically. So if somebody asks you like what is the cost for the Visual Studio Professional subscription, you need to say $45. And somebody asks you what is the cost for Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, you need to say $250 per month per user. So if you want to see any kind of blogs or articles on the Azure DevOps, you can go to this Azure DevOps, devblogs.microsoft.com/devops. Or simple answer. For all these pages, if you want to go simply, if you want to see about any customer case studies or customer stories, you can go here. On the Azure or Azure DevOps also. One thing that you can feel happy or one thing that you can feel proud about Microsoft basically or about Azure DevOps is when you are talking about any other tool or when you are talking about any other software, I don't feel like that the other software or the other tool is giving enough documentation for a public usage actually, but Microsoft is giving. Basically all these part of their business strategy. That's it. The simple marketing strategy is when you give a product for the demo use for most of the public will use it and make use of it in the real time, right? So simple answer. This is also a marketing strategy, like if the documentation is made it available for the end user, and if the product is good, if the product is okay, then automatically the sales will be increasing, right? That's the business strategy behind this making this documentation available for the public. Okay, and at the end of the day you are supposed to know about this one, Azure DevOps Labs. This is one of the website that you should be read out loudly always when you are going to explore something in the Azure DevOps. So these are something like examples actually. When you want to deploy an application to multi-container application in the Azure Kubernetes service, when you want to deploy something to the database, when you want to deploy, when you want to create your pipelines for Terraform, when you want to deploy the pipeline, and you want to create the pipelines with Ansible. Not only limited, basically both. There are a lot of actually. The reason why I'm explaining basically I prefer to explain all these concepts or all the discussion that we had today in the end of the batch actually. But the reason why I wanted to make it explained today or in the initial days of the classes is to make sure you are going to use your leisure time to develop your thought process, to get your hands dirty on the Azure DevOps. All of you clear? Give me a minute. I'll plug in my charger for laptop. Guys, acknowledgement please.
Sure. Okay, sir.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I'm sending the URLs what I have shown you right now in this one.